by our American colleagues. You have, in expectation, 5 of the leading mediators in the United States to give us their wisdom and experience. There are 3 former presidents of the International Academy, and one founder, Eric Galton, who is the father of us all. And if you haven't found it, his book on mediation advocacy for Texas is a classic, which no mediator or lawyer who wants to mediate should be without. I won't introduce all the speakers because Jean Mosevich, who is going to be leading the group, is the person who's going to introduce them all. Jean is also a former president, one of the leading mediators in the country, and a good friend and colleague and mentor to very many of us, including Jody in Hong Kong and me in London. It's going to be a great pleasure, please, to introduce Jean. But before I do so, may I thank the people who've made this symposium possible. Apart from the technical team, the sponsors are the people who have made this. And you see there the names on the screen in front of you. We're extremely grateful to all of them for their generosity, which has made us possible to transmit these seminars all over the world with a simultaneous translation into Mandarin for the People's Republic of China. I'll just give you a moment to look through their names. So thank you indeed, our sponsors. And now I pass over to Jean, who is going to introduce the capsule number 6. Judy, I think that Sam will be starting the...
Yes, here is. Give me 1 second.
Whilst you do that, let's really welcome Audit from Israel. It's lovely to see you here. And I've seen my friend Amrani from Egypt. At the end of the session, there will be time for questions. If you could use the chat button at the bottom of your screen to send the questions in, then Jean will field them and Jodie and I will also be here. CW, is Sam
Yeah, so I will be sharing the screen and sharing the video in a minute.
Excellent. Good. Well, whilst you're waiting for that, can I just introduce the International Academy to those of you who haven't met us before? It's an academy. It's not a commercial organization. It's an invitation-only academy of the leading mediators in the world, and we are open to receive applications from members. If you want to be interested, do send an email to me. I now hand over to Jean.
Ni hao. And I know that means hello in, I hope, in your language. I hope I've said it correctly. My name is Gene Moskovich. I am a mediator in Los Angeles, California. I have been mediating full-time for 22 years now. And I have the distinct honor and privilege of hosting and presenting this next session to you, actually the final session of your 3-day symposium. And I'm going to be aided by 4 other speakers, most of whom are, like myself, former presidents of the International Academy of Mediators. Together, we comprise about 120 years of mediation experience. And thousands and thousands of mediations to back that up. So I hope that our suggestions or our insights will be of some value to you. The topic that we've chosen today couldn't possibly be any more current. It has to do with virtual mediation. It has to do with Zoom mediation, and how that intersects with traditional mediation. Those of us who have been doing this for a long time know what has been effective and not effective in our traditional mediations, and now we're all needing to adapt to Zoom. There's no question that Zoom is here to stay. Whether it's because people will become very used to this format, or because, as is more likely, even after the world returns to normal, including the United States, and I know we're lagging behind in many respects. But when the world returns to normal, I anticipate that at best you'll have some hybrid mediation, some combinations of people appearing in person, but people also zooming in as part of the same mediation, just because of the expediency and the economy of doing it in that way. So we all need to re-gear, and like a blind person has to develop their other senses, we need to develop our other senses, our other qualities and techniques to make this mode of mediating just as effective, or why not more effective than what we've had before. So with that in mind, I want to turn to the issue of Zoom mediations. And we're going to try to look at what Zoom has added, what it has perhaps taken away, and what we can do about that. We want to look at what the opportunities are that exist now because of Zoom, but we also want to look at what the possible obstacles might be, the ways in which mediation is somewhat disadvantaged by going through a computer screen as opposed to an in-person meeting. In order to begin to do that, in my view, I think I need to spend just a couple of minutes talking about what I believe, after my own 3,000 mediations over this period of time, what I believe to be the essential elements of any good mediation, whether it's virtual or in person. And from there we can digress as to what Zoom adds or takes away from that, and how we can adapt to it. I believe that the essence of mediation, obviously, is communication, but within the notion of communication is the building of trust. Tremendously important. Your trust, your credibility in the other room, your ability to project optimism and confidence, and your credibility, all tremendously important. Another key criteria, I believe, of any successful mediation is our ability to demonstrate empathy, to put ourselves in the shoes of the other person, to be non-judgmental, and to try to see the world the way they see it, even if it's not, perhaps not completely accurate in some respects. It's their view, and they need, they certainly need to feel supported in that regard before they can even begin to take a step back from it and look at it perhaps a little more critically, not necessarily themselves, but the way others, a trier of fact, a jury, or a judge might also look at it, even if it's not what they would prefer. Another key ingredient and part of the communication process is what I call reading the room, which is tremendously, it's part of the dynamic of a mediation, and it's one of the areas that Zoom makes a bit more difficult, and we'll be talking about that. It's your ability to size up the participants, get a sense of when they're with you, get a sense of when you may have lost them, when they're when they're pleased, when they're upset, what they're upset about, and how you can try to deal with that. And it's a continuing process. Each time you come back on a screen, each time you go back in a room, that dynamic will have probably changed, and your ability to have your intuition and your instincts and your ability to read that room are tremendously important in a in-person mediation as well as in a virtual mediation. The other thing that I think is essential to any good mediation is the ability to manage expectations, to try to gracefully, if possible, bring the plaintiff into a more reasonable analysis of what the value of their case might be, not just subjectively to themselves, but in the eyes of others. And to convince a defendant that even though they or their company might see things differently, they do have exposure. And there is risk of substantial liability that needs to be taken into account for settlement purposes, for purposes of deciding what is, a fair and appropriate compromise, not what can happen on each side's best day, but as a compromise position. In that regard, what we try to do is help people set reasonable goals and expectations, and that becomes part of the equation. The other is identifying risk. Is this a 50-50 proposition? Is it 60-40, 80-20? Which way? And nothing's ever 100-0, and that goes for the credibility and support of certain important facts. And it goes for the interpretation of law as well, in the eyes of a third party. And by a third party, I don't mean myself as the mediator, but rather a trier of fact if, as a consequence of an unsuccessful mediation, the case were to go to trial. The key, I believe, to that I've seen in my practice to keeping this all correctly paced and correctly timed and moving in a positive direction is something I call always be closing. That's the ABC of mediation, or at least of successful mediation. From the moment you say hello, to every interaction you have with the parties, whether it's prior to the mediation itself or during the mediation. Your focus must always be on how to get this to close, how to create a positive visualization for them that helps them recognize that their lives and the lives of their business will be so much improved if this irritant, this distraction can be removed, both from a company and personally from a plaintiff. We're trying to create closure. We're trying to get them to close the page, close the chapter, excuse me, or the book. It's not always easy. Sometimes people have trouble letting go, and occasionally that's true of the lawyers themselves. Well, let's now take a look at Zoom and see in what ways Zoom adds to our ability to hit some of those essential items and to conduct a fruitful and successful mediation. I think that some people would say that the Zoom format is, highly conducive to good listening and good communicating. We'll have more to say about that. There are two different views of that. Certainly, all would agree that the parties would seem to be less stressed during a Zoom mediation. They're in the comfort of their own home. They haven't been struggling through traffic to try to get to a mediation on time. They're in a familiar surrounding, and hopefully they're a bit more relaxed, a bit more open, a bit more willing to engage and see different points of view. In a Zoom mediation, there are always going to be common points of reference, whether it's the technological difficulties that people are dealing with as a common problem, or whether it's just commiserating about, at this stage, the world of COVID-19 and the ways in which it has changed our lives and changed commercial life in so many ways. And that can be bonding in many respects. Another quality of Zoom is there's practically no limit to how many people can attend. And I think that will always be true, even after things supposedly go back to normal. That people from all parts of the world will now be able to participate in mediations that they might not have otherwise participated in. And that includes important decision makers like insurance companies, CEOs of companies, people of that nature who might not have the time to fly, in my case, to Los Angeles to attend a one-day mediation, but who can selectively tune in and out to, or at least let their views be known as part of a Zoom mediation. So there are certainly some advantages to Zoom. We try to I won't say exploit, but we try to harvest those as best we can. It has the potential to be a much more personal, a much more intimate experience in that we're up close, we're face to face. Because of that, because it sometimes takes place in an office setting, depending on cultural standards, sometimes in a home setting for each of the participants. There's the opportunity to find other common points of reference. I've noticed that occasionally pets will come into view during a mediation, and people will all, have a chuckle about that, or we'll hear a child crying in the background, and that lends itself to also some very relaxed and collegial and friendly conversation. So there are many ways in which Zoom provides new and interesting opportunities for us. But I also want to look at the ways in which we are potentially hindered by the Zoom format. First of all, of course, there can be technological difficulties. Getting everyone online, getting everyone's audio working, getting everyone on the same page doesn't always happen right at the moment of the beginning of the mediation. You try to do that, but in terms of taking responsibility for your own setup and equipment, but there may be problems coming from the other sources, from the attorneys or from the parties. Again, whether it be from different settings or from a common setting. There's also the problem of not being able to be, as the mediator, a more gracious host. I mediate with an organization named Judicate West. We have offices in 7 different locations throughout California. Each one of them has anywhere from 10 to 30 very nicely appointed conference rooms. And one of the things we do is really take care of the parties and the attorneys. We serve them a very wonderful lunch. We have snacks all day long, where you can smell the cookies baking at around 3 o'clock. And we try to give people the experience of breaking bread and of having a chance to be in a more relaxed setting, whether it's with the other side or more frequently within their own camp. I can't do that, obviously, with the Zoom mediation. I think I talked to you previously about reading the room. It is, in my opinion, harder to read the room in a Zoom mediation in some respects. We need to adjust to that. We need to find new ways of doing that, and we'll be identifying those for you. I personally have felt some limitations working with Zoom in terms of my ability to create trust and develop empathy by virtue of my direct communication. I am striving to make it as successful as I think I have been over these last 22 years mediating in person, but there are differences of gestures and tone and emphasis that arise during a video mediation that are sometimes not as effective, sometimes not as noticeable or understood as they might be in a more personal setting. So those are advantages. Those are disadvantages to the Zoom format. And now the remaining issue becomes, well, what are we going to do about that? It would certainly seem like Zoom is here to stay, one way or the other. Mediation is like so many other parts of our society. Mediation is going to have to catch up with these changes. It's not enough to just complain about the differences, but we need to now as effectively as possible, all work together as professionals to increase our ability to overcome some of these obstacles. And I want to share a couple of these with you, and I know that our following speakers will be doing that as well. So how can we make it better? Well, certainly the notion of preparation is important in all mediation, but probably even more so when doing a virtual mediation. Here in the U.S., we try to do pre-mediation phone calls. We try to communicate with the attorney prior to the mediation, learn some things about the relationships between the attorney-client relationship on each side, speaking to each attorney in separate conversations. And we try to learn as much about the parties, the business, and the dispute as we can beforehand, whether it's looking at people's websites or looking at Facebook or studying the industry itself. We want to be able to demonstrate to everyone else that we care about their case, and we're as knowledgeable as any outside party could possibly be in terms of our ability to look at and help them look at the dispute that they're involved in. We certainly try to take advantage of the kind of setting we're going to create. Now, some of you may have noticed that the backdrop for this particular presentation is my home. It's my home in Santa Monica, California. It's about a mile away from the beach, over across the Pacific Ocean from you. And I'm trying, by virtue of this setting, to create some intimacy, create some informality. And there are some mediations that will call for that and be conducive to that. Obviously, there are cultural differences that need to be taken into account. There are others where a more formal setting might be more appropriate. Whether, and that being, either a courtroom or a law office, a conference room, things of that nature. So it depends on what kind of tone you want to set, but that's something, uniquely within our own power and our own ability as a way to make Zoom more effective. We do probably have to work harder to demonstrate compassion, to convey authenticity, and establish our credibility. And that involves being a good listener, which is important in any mediation, but I think especially so in a Zoom mediation, to let people have their say. This is, for all intents and purposes, should the case settle, and most cases do, this is their day in court. This is their day to be heard, and they shouldn't be cut. The parties shouldn't be cut off. The lawyers shouldn't just engage in a very separate dialogue that excludes them, unless those are part of the ground rules of how the mediation is being handled. So we also will need to be good observers. We need to take advantage of some of the things that Zoom gives us. When I'm in person in a large conference room, I can't watch the parties nearly as closely as I can in a Zoom mediation. Without them knowing it or being conscious of it, I can watch for every twitch, every smile, every roll of the eyes, every shaking of the head, yes and no. It gives me a lot of feedback that I might not be able to take in a larger setting. So having that kind of care and that kind of developing that competency is something that you can certainly use to your advantage. I thank you so much for your attention today, for your interest in the ways in which mediation is conducted around the world. And I welcome you to our International Academy of Mediators, and hope you will enjoy these presentations as a sample of what goes on at our conferences. I invite you to submit questions by chat so that I can be reviewing those as the 90-minute period goes by, and perhaps give some thought to my responses. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity on behalf of IAM. I think you probably know by now that we're a 25-year, we've been in existence for 25 years, that we are 200 members strong globally across 5 continents. that the organization is by invitation only, but that we do have several different levels of entry and membership, and that we are very much encouraging participation and involvement with the help of Jody Sin, who's been a guiding light for us in terms of penetrating and learning more about commercial mediation on the Asian continent. We hope that we'll give you today a sample of the kinds of dialogues that we engage in at our annual meetings, and which take place all over the world, and at our webinars and issues that are discussed on our exclusive access website and listserv. Our first guest speaker is Eric Galton. Eric is a close friend of mine, a former president of the International Academy of Mediators. And I think you'll find the setting that he mediates in to be very interesting. And
Michelle, yeah.
in his pre-COVID,
Somebody's turned my video off.
COVID
mediations,
mediations,
it says that the host is
very conducive
to my video.
to settlement, as is his personality. He's an author, a teacher, and certainly the finest mediator in Austin, Texas overall, and all parts in that neighborhood. So here's Eric Galton.
Because Jody's on.
From Austin, Texas. My name is Eric Galton with the Lakeside Mediation Center. I'm also a past president of the International Academy of Mediators. It's a real delight to be with you today. I want to express my appreciation first to both the organizers and sponsors of this wonderful conference. My only regret is that I won't have the opportunity to meet all of you in person, but hopefully that day will become soon and sooner than later. I've been assigned the task of looking into the future, predicting what the mediation universe in the United States and maybe beyond might look like after COVID, and what changes will we see after we get a vaccine and we return to normal. What qualifications do I have to be a predictor of the future? My qualifications are as follows. In 1988, I advised my then large law firm that I had found my real passion in life and was going to become a mediator. Back then in Texas, if you can imagine it, most folks were confusing mediation with meditation. In fact, the early pioneers in my state in mediation, when we'd hold a seminar or a conference or a meeting to discuss mediation, we'd have about 8 or 9 participants, probably 7 of them believing that it was a meditation seminar. We've come an awful long way from that point. Texas was one of the 3 or 4 leaders in the United States to fully develop mediation and the mediation practice. In 1991, I wrote my first of 5 books entitled Representing Clients at Mediation. It won a CPR Best Book Award, and I was basically predicting that lawyers would need to learn how to more effectively represent clients at mediation. And that book was sort of prophetic. It was the first of its kind. And I think it basically gave me the reputation of predicting and calling the shots about the mediation movement as it progressed in the United States. And so I think those are my qualifications. Now, before we talk about the future, I think we have to look backwards into the past. And I think that we have to understand something. There was a virus before COVID in the United States. It was called the Kill the Joint or General Session virus. It started about 10 years ago, mostly on the coast in California, New York. And basically, it was a movement that I think was really directed by lawyers who represented clients who would come to their mediators and say, we don't need a joint session. Everybody knows about the case, or something bad will happen at the joint session. people will get uncomfortable, and it sometimes is just a waste of time and make things worse. Now, when you really think about that, the joint or general session is one of the bedrock underpinnings of the mediation process. It's the most party-centric part of the mediation process. It's the time where all parties convene in a room and give light and voice to everybody. It's still taught in law schools, it's still taught in major training centers, it's still taught around the world. And frankly, I saw this virus as dangerous. But just like COVID, the kill the joint session virus spread rapidly. And it has spread rapidly throughout the United States, to the point today where the joint session is probably used only 20 to 25% of the time. And the rest of the time, parties and their lawyers attend mediations and they just go to their separate rooms. There is no joint meeting. I view that as a worrisome trend, but I view it as a seismic transformation of the mediation process that was well underway even before COVID. And the more that you sort of squish the people out of the process, then you begin to wonder, why do we really even have to convene in person? So enter COVID-19 in the United States. I shuttered my mediation center in March of this year. We were just about to celebrate our 20th anniversary in business. I have not been back to my mediation center since. After March, I have conducted, by this date, nearly 100 virtual mediations. And I don't expect to return to my mediation center until the spring and summer of 2021. And that's assuming everything goes well, because the infection rates in my state of Texas are still increasing, not decreasing. And we don't imagine that we will be able to safely return to in-person until mid to late next year. So when you really kind of think about that, you have to ponder what's going to be the effect on parties and lawyers and businesses if they've been mediating virtually for nearly a year. What exactly is going to happen? Now, I need to also supplement this before I make a few predictions for you by the pleasant surprises of virtual mediation. Now, I have to tell you, I was a skeptic. I really did not expect virtual mediation to be nearly as effective as in-person mediation. I worried about whether or not I could make connections with the parties the way I did in person. I wasn't sure that I could come across effectively as a mediator using the technology. After about 2 to 3 weeks of beginning to do virtual mediations, I overcame my self-consciousness about seeing myself on the screen. I got to tell you, I still don't like it very much. I never wanted to be a news broadcaster, and I don't like myself on video particularly well. But once I became comfortable with the technology, I realized that there were benefits and advantages of virtual mediation that came as a complete and total surprise to me. One of the things that I found really surprising generally is that settlement rates at virtual mediation are the same, if not slightly better, than in-person mediation. That's a real surprise to me. And that's just not my view of it. As I've polled mediators around the state, and I've talked to my colleagues with the International Academy of Mediators around the United States, almost all the mediators that I've been in contact with are anecdotally reporting the same phenomenon. So why would that be? Why would it be that we're having more success or slightly more success using the virtual platform? I've given some thought to that, and here's what I think. I underestimated the stress of human beings having to actually all get together and convene in a spot. You've first of all got the logistical issues, parking, traffic, getting on an airplane, getting somewhere on time, having to catch an airplane. It creates a great deal of stress. It also creates a great deal of cost. More on that in a moment. And there's also an emotional stress. You can see from my virtual background the view from my conference room in my mediation center. We are right next to Lake Austin. All the conference rooms are right by the water. We tried very hard to perfect a really lovely and comforting environment for people who were in deep conflict who came to our mediation center. These days, though, most of the parties who attend my mediation are attending from their homes or their offices, places where they feel very, very comfortable. They don't have to worry about traffic. They don't have to worry about catching a plane. They don't have to worry about seeing people who make them uncomfortable. They don't have to worry about being in a spot that's unfamiliar to them. And I actually see them even better. There's the occasional child who accidentally walks into the room, or the dog or the cat, or they might have a photograph or a painting behind them, or there in the corner of their room, I can see a guitar. There are so many ways now that I can connect and get a better idea of who these people actually are. And they feel more relaxed and calmer. I've also noticed from the lawyer perspective that lawyers are more polite in virtual space than they are in person. People tend to get down to business sooner than later. And from that vantage point, I think there is an impetus towards settlement. Nobody feels pressured. They feel less pressured. They feel more collectively organized to try to achieve a result. Now, there are the occasional malfunctions with the technology, and those are really great opportunities for bonding. I like when people get lost and get bumped off the platform to demonstrate my competency, which astonishes me, and be able to get them back on. I like the fact that I can move people around to different rooms and make things work better. And, you know, from a mediator perspective, and this also was a surprise to me, I feel calmer. I don't feel the pressure that I've got to get to the airport by 6 o'clock. I'm already home. If we need to go later, we can. If we can get it done sooner, I'm already in a place that I enjoy being. And I think that this experience has really surprised parties, lawyers, and mediators. And so I think this experiment, which will continue the rest of this year and throughout next year, really is the predicate for the predictions that I'm about to make. So let's imagine all of us when the world returns back to normal, or our version of normal, when we can travel freely, when we can be together freely. Should we expect that after a year of virtual mediation, that people will flock back to our offices, get on airplanes, impose the costs that go along with it so that we can mediate in person? I think not. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think at least 50 to 60% of my cases will still be handled virtually. And I think they will be effective. I think settlement rates will still be high. I think it will be a productive use of everyone's time. I think the remainder, 25% or so, will be in person, maybe for cases with really high emotion, or where there's a feeling that the case is so complex that maybe we really need a forum where we're all together for a few days to try to work out a very large problem. And then I think some hybrids will exist. Some people will appear in person, some people will appear virtually, and I think we'll see that. So should we shed a tear about these changes that are happening? I'll go back in time one more time for you. If you had said to those of us in the United States in 1988 that a conference like this one would happen, no one would have believed it. None of us who were pioneers ever expected we'd make a full-time living, mediating disputes and doing something that we love so dearly. None of us expected that we would be teaching and training mediators not only around our country, but around the world. Nobody would have expected that all 50 states in the United States would be actively using mediation, and that at least 35 or 40 countries around the world are in the process of doing the same and building vibrant communities of mediators. No one would have ever thought of any of that. I remember after 3 years of volunteer work, being called at my law firm one day, and the lawyer said, "Eric, what would you charge to do a mediation?" I'd never thought that I would ever commercially make any money doing this process. But here we all are. I think this is a time of great transformation. I think in 5 or 6 years, those of us who are pioneers are going to move off to the side. I think we're going to be the mentors, and I think we're going to watch with wonder what the next generation of mediators will do. Think about that for a moment. I'm talking about the young people in their 35 to 58-year age group who grew up with technology all of their lives, who understand it, who didn't have to adapt to it. And what wonderful things will they do to expand the reach of mediation, to make it more accessible to people around the planet, to not just do court annex cases, but the everyday problems that people have with their homes, with their businesses, and in their lives. Take this one thought with you. We didn't go into mediation in the first instance with the idea of a commercial business. We did it because we believed that the mediation process would fundamentally help people resolve conflicts more efficiently and better. We felt that this would be something that people could do and could learn that there were effective ways of resolving their problems. I think we've taken the ball and done a pretty good job with it. But there is so much more creativity. There is so much more adaptation that we can take place, and to really fulfill the long-term goal of mediation, which is to let people know that there really are solutions that can be created with reasonable conversations and involvement of people in a process that is really, really worth it. So, my friends, I hope this has been somewhat useful to you. I wish that we could have met and shared a drink or a glass of wine, but hopefully sometime in the future we will. And for all of you who continue to do the good work of mediators, bless you for doing that. I've enjoyed having an opportunity to visit with you. I hope we see each other soon.
Our next speaker is Jeffrey Krivis. Jeff Krivis was one of the founders of the International Academy of Mediators. He and 6 other people gathered together in Hawaii in 1995 or 1996 and conceived of an organization like this that would bring the most talented and most successful mediators in the world together and give them an opportunity to share ideas. So Jeff is a founder and also a former president of the IAM. He mediates in California like myself, and he has promised to share with us 3 techniques that he uses in his Zoom mediations. But knowing Jeff, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes up with 4 or 5. So this is Jeffrey Krivis.
Greetings, Hong Kong. I'm Jeff Krivis, and I'm going to get straight to the point. Today, I'd like to share with you 3 useful techniques that I've been using in response to the pandemic to help parties feel comfortable in managing conflict in an online environment. Historically, our practice brought people together using table talk, bringing certain people in the case together where they can actually look at each other, observe body language, and get clarification on issues in dispute. When people are physically present, they tend to behave in a certain way that we have come to find assists us in reaching agreement. When they're in 12 digital rooms, things change. And COVID has forced us to think through the effective uses of plenary sessions in a very different way. So in my experience, everything that happens online happens to an extreme. Eye contact, distractions, facial expressions. People are not as self-aware of their surroundings and their impact on others. They view their own bubble and they forget that the audience is watching. Sometimes they see themselves on the computer screen and start combing their hair, grooming themselves, and so on. They're forgetting that we might be watching. So it's our job to make them comfortable and to create the space to effectively exchange information and negotiate deals. So the foundation for everything I do online these days is called creating value by ensuring that every communication is designed to move the case forward. Here's the formula I follow. Number 1, provide leadership. That means provide some kind of direction every time you have a contact or touch with someone in the room. Tell them where we're going and why we're going in that direction. It's the capacity or the skill of giving other people direction so that they can start moving in a particular way. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Basically, show them where the opportunity is that's better than the situation they find themselves in. Show them where the danger is. I sometimes refer to this as the minefield. Show how progress.
去到4-5月份到啦，4-5月份到，好遲㗎，4-5月㗎。
People feel isolated, they're alone, they're helpless, particularly online. By developing a relationship with them, it gives them the confidence to go in a particular direction. This involves encouraging, supporting, and providing them a sense of certainty. The last thing about this foundation that I find useful is providing capabilities or creativity. These are new tools for problem solving. It's like give them a fish or show them how to fish. So against this backdrop, I'd like to demonstrate the techniques I've been using. Remember, this isn't a formula. It doesn't work on every case. There are tools that are available depending on the circumstances. So here's the first technique. I call it going dark in the Zoom. So here's the concept. It's like a forced listening session that circumvents any potential arguments that could destroy the moment. Share information by turning off their audio and video of the recipients so their reactions cannot be seen. They're forced to listen and they're forced to watch a great lawyer explain the case. It's definitely counterintuitive to what we learn in mediation school. So let me take you behind the curtain for a moment and show you how it's done. So here's a real case that happened. I changed the names and the facts a little bit. An inventor of specialized software is terminated after many years of service due to personal improprieties. Royalties are substantial, but the institution doesn't want to pay because they don't want to reward bad behavior. So during the mediation, both sides present privately very extensive and complex financial estimates of what the royalty payments might be. And they're providing that to me in real time. So I don't have the luxury of studying Excel spreadsheets and information to present to the other side privately in caucus. So my plan is to have a joint session, but I can't really do that with so many people involved in an effective way, particularly because my concern is somebody might look away, somebody might not pay attention, and the person that's presenting the information might get the wrong message. So I encourage the parties to get together, and I turn the audio off, I turn the video off, and I have the best lawyer in the room present the information to a blank screen. that person knows that there are recipients on the blank screen, but they're not allowed to respond. All they can do is listen. And when that information is presented, not just by the mediator, by the person who studied the information, prepared the Excel spreadsheet, and can discuss royalties in a very specific way, it has an impact, almost like going to court. That's number one. Number two, second technique, create a virus or a pandemic. This is where momentum comes in. So let me put this to you in pandemic terms so everyone can relate. So we think of a pandemic as starting from a virus that starts small but results in a turning point where transformation occurs in a society. So movement is happening at all times. It's contagious. We know that. And we know that little causes can have big effects. Change happens not gradually, but in one dramatic moment. I learned this from Malcolm Gladwell. In our world of mediation, our virus begins by gathering information, diagnosing the underlying problem, and creating movement. During each of these moments in the case, we're communicating either in caucus or joint session, but usually in caucus in a commercial case. At the conclusion, we create closure through an agreement. The key to success online is creating that movement, keeping everything going forward. To create movement, it's similar to what happened in the pandemic. Small change creates a large narrative. So don't just carry water. Don't just bring the information to the other room. Make sure there's a story to tell behind each presentation or offer. And there's three things that I see when creating this kind of pandemic situation so that they feel like a narrative occurs. Make it like an epidemic. We all know what's going on. Make sure that there's ideas and messages and behaviors that start to spread. As the orchestrator of the movement, you can create the narrative in a way that keeps people on their toes, waiting for the next scene to develop, or you can be static and simply repeat information. Be dynamic. Idea number two, when it comes to creating a pandemic, and this again is where Malcolm Gladwell's writings come in. Be sticky. Make sure the message is memorable. Don't just say the information. Make sure they remember it. Make sure you think of the context of the environment. Consider the time and place. Don't just present information without considering who the people are, where they live. And third, find a champion in one of those rooms. This would be a promoter or a catalyst. Somebody who could be a persuader who helps you build trust and rapport as you create that little pandemic. Let me give you one example of a class action in a wage and hour case. I'm presented with a retail business that has significant violations of their wage and hour laws, including rounding hours improperly, not providing meal and rest breaks, and off-the-clock violations. But I'm told by the owner of the business that they have financial limitations due to COVID that prohibit them from paying the kind of settlement they know they need to pay to get the case settled. So I know that there's financial limitations and I know there's liability. And so what I do is not just walk into the other room and tell the parties that, they can't afford to pay. I try to slowly create the story of who the owner is, what the owner feels about the case, and what the owner's current limitations are. And then I take them to the next scene. And after the plaintiff is ready for the information on the next scene, I talk to them about money. And usually that's a lower value than the plaintiff is looking for. And that's when I deliver the message, we might have some financial limitations due to COVID. So let's go through what that means. And before I get to the final movement of the case where I'm trying to get everybody into a real reasonable range that both sides can live with, I let some time pass. You've got to make sure that there's pacing and timing in these things. And then I come in for closure. And usually by that time, people are ready. Let me give you one more third technique I use, and that's called rescue routines. What's a rescue routine? Usually parties have a sense of overconfidence, which needs to be managed. And people have go-to phrases that they use because they don't know how to engage properly. I have go-to phrases. They're generally based on storytelling techniques, words, and things that I've used in other cases, examples from other cases that I can bring up in a pre-planned situation. And you know, in almost every case, people are going to default to pre-planned defenses that we've heard over and over again. So sometimes I'll write down my rescue routine, my stories as a reminder and keep next to the computer. For example, number one, somebody might say, I believe in truth and justice. You've got to have a comeback for that because it's so generic. Or somebody might say, I can't settle. My family told me it's got to be at least X amount of dollars. Well, that comes up a lot. My lawyer told me it has to be X amount of dollars, but they don't know why. How about this one? Authority is the issue. I don't have authority. I've got to talk to my boss. We know that's going to happen on the defense in almost every case. Here's one. I can't settle because God's on my side and God told me not to settle. I remember a woman in a case who grabbed my arm and spoke in tongue for 2 minutes about how God was on her side. And I let her do that. And at the end of that, she said to me, and Jeff, God wants me to settle for $200,000. Please go in there and get it. And I said, sure thing, lady. I'm all over it. You've got to be ready for any of those things. The other planned statements people make are, they deserve to get punished. That guy will never try the case. That's why we pay you the big bucks. Make a list of all the things that you hear over and over again and write down the 2 or 3 stories that you've been able to use in the past that are successful, that are sticky, that they'll remember. Let me give you some extra credit. All right, so those are the 3 techniques. Another thing I do is often I will use my iPhone to text proposals that takes pressure off people. Why? If I keep walking back in the room every 10 minutes, I think they get tired of me. I think they need pressure away from the mediator sometimes. So I might just send them an email or a text saying, I'll be back in X amount of minutes, but I wanted to let you know that here's their offer. Next thing I do is I create an Excel spreadsheet, which I call a predictive leveling chart, which is just a chart of offers and counteroffers, which summarizes what the midpoint might be. And periodically, I'll share my screen and show them what it might look like. And when they see what the midpoint is and they hear it, I look for their reaction. And if their reaction is positive, I know that that's a number or range that they might be interested in. And so I've given you 3 + 2 extra credit points for useful techniques. Let me just say to conclude that we live in a world of massive change. The population of the world has varying degrees of ability to deal with this change, from high ability to no ability whatsoever. Most mediators are in the high ability area. They're in the high ability area because the environment or conditions that you choose to put yourself in has forced you to become responsive. It's not necessarily because you want things, but you're face to face with reality. You get punished very quickly for your mistakes. You only get rewarded for creating value. Creating value is providing leadership and providing direction. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Our third speaker is Lee Jacobson. Lee Jacobson mediates in Fresno, California. It's about halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco, and it's referred to as the Central Valley. Lee is also a former president of the International Academy of Mediators, as well as a former membership chair. And he's going to be talking to you about distributive bargaining, the ways in which that is ordinarily performed and the ways in which it needs to be adapted for successful use in Zoom mediations. I think you'll find it to be very interesting.
My name is Lee Jacobson. I am currently a mediator in Fresno, California, which is located in California's Great Central Valley. I graduated from the University of California at Davis in 1977, and then went on to law school at Santa Clara University, where I obtained my Juris Doctorate in 1980. I then spent 20 years as a litigation lawyer specializing in insurance defense matters, and began my career as a mediator in the year 2000. Since that time, I have mediated approximately 4,500 cases and also serve as an arbitrator. I was elected to the International Academy of Mediators as a distinguished fellow in the year 2011 and served as the organization's president in the year 2018-2019. At the outset, I would like to thank IAM past President Gene Moskovitz, our President-elect Michelle Calapetis, and IAM Board of Governor member Jody Sin, as well as members of the Hong Kong Mediation Council for all of their efforts in making this symposium a reality. Distributive bargaining, which is also known as zero-sum or win-lose bargaining, is a competitive bargaining strategy which is often employed in settlement negotiations where the primary issue to be resolved is how much money will it take to settle the dispute. The party seeking compensation begins the process by setting forth an initial demand, which is then communicated to the party or parties who are being asked to pay. The initial demand is almost always rejected and is met with a settlement offer, which too is almost always rejected. With the chances of a matter settling for someone's first number, be it a demand or an offer, being somewhere between extremely slim to just about non-existent, oftentimes the importance of first numbers in the bargaining process is either overlooked or ignored. This leads to a distinct possibility that the negotiating environment may become polluted, with one side or the other, or both, displaying righteous indignation at the opening position taken by their adversary. Statements such as, "That number is a clear indication they are not here in good faith," or, "If I would have known that's the number they were going to start with, I never would have agreed to this mediation," or, "You have no idea how angry their number makes me given all of the time and effort and expense that I've put in preparing for, traveling to, and attending this mediation." These statements are often made when one side puts forth a number that is viewed by their adversary as totally void of merit or consideration and is truly not reflective of a likely result should the matter not settle and proceed to trial. First numbers in the distributive bargaining process are often guided by a belief that opening numbers play a key role in determining the amount a case settles for. This concept is known as anchoring. Parties seeking compensation will start the distributive bargaining process with an extremely high figure, knowing full well that their number won't be accepted by their adversary and may also result in an angry reaction, simply because of their belief the higher you start, the higher the case will resolve for. This same type of behavior is also engaged in by those who are making offers to pay. The lower the amount of the first offer, the lower the amount of the eventual settlement. Distributive bargaining is what I term to be an action-reaction evolving process. Once the bargaining begins with communication of a first demand, or in those rare cases where a first offer is made before receipt of a first demand, the number given in response thereto is almost always influenced by a party's reaction to learning of their adversary's settlement position. If a defendant views a first settlement demand made by a plaintiff as being a realistic assessment of what could happen if the matter were to be tried and decided by either a judge or a jury, that defendant is much more likely to respond with a first number that is much closer to the plaintiff's first demand than would be the case if the defendant's reaction to the plaintiff's first number is the only way that result could ever occur is for everything to go right for the plaintiff and wrong for the defendant. On the other hand, a number which is thought to be highly unrealistic will almost always result in an unrealistic number being submitted in response thereto. Heavy reliance on the use of distributive bargaining as a means to narrow the gap between the parties can be highly inefficient and may result in negotiations grinding to a halt. When the parties engage in distributive bargaining techniques, they are always letting their adversary know exactly what their next move is going to be. This often has the effect of limiting or suppressing the magnitude of moves parties will make while engaged in the distributive bargaining process. Large substantive moves, either upward or downward, are less likely to occur, since if one side makes the decision to do so and communicates their intent to the other side, the risk they face is that the other side fails to make a similar substantive move. When this occurs, oftentimes there are pronounced expressions of anger and outrage, which can, in a worst-case scenario, result in a refusal to continue with settlement negotiations. Statements like, "I reduced my demand by $150,000, and they only came up with an additional $10,000. I'm not doing this anymore." Those type of statements have been known to occur with lots of frequency. The shift to conducting mediations via video conference, as opposed to live in-person meetings, has significant consequences when it comes to time management of the process. With live in-person mediations, all of the participants arrive at the mediation already having invested significant amounts of time and money preparing for and traveling to the site of the mediation. Oftentimes, mediation participants will have traveled many hours to attend the mediation. This investment in the mediation process reduces the likelihood that a party will abandon the mediation early in the distributive bargaining process due to anger with the opposing side's position. Mediation via video conferencing significantly reduces, if not totally eliminates, the amount of time invested in making an appearance at a mediation. For example, a Southern California-based attorney can avoid 8 to 10 hours of driving to attend a mediation which is being held in the Central Valley of California. There is an inverse relationship between the amount of time parties invest prior to commencement of the mediation conference and their willingness to walk away from negotiations at the beginning stages of distributive bargaining if they perceive their adversaries are not negotiating in good faith. So the question becomes, what actions can be taken, not only by mediators, but also by mediation participants, to minimize the potential harmful effects distributive bargaining may have on the negotiation process? Here are a few suggestions. 1, schedule a pre-mediation conference dialogue between involved counsel and the mediator. These discussions should focus primarily on the action-reaction nature of the bargaining process, and also emphasize that irrespective of whether it is someone's first demand or offer or their sixth demand or offer. Each side utilizes a similar type of action-reaction analysis wherein they evaluate their upside potential versus their downside risk against their adversary's current settlement offer or demand. For a plaintiff, upside potential is the likelihood of getting a better net economic result by going to trial versus accepting the current settlement offer being made by the defendant. Downside risk is the likelihood of winding up with a worse economic result at trial versus accepting the current settlement offer. For a defendant, upside potential means going to trial and having to pay less than the amount of the plaintiff's current settlement demand, with downside risk being the chance of having to pay more money than what the case could settle for given the plaintiff's current settlement demand. Protracted distributive bargaining involving the presentation of numbers where there is a significant likelihood that there will be a large differential between upside potential and downside risk can easily lead to anger, frustration, and a decision to stop participating in this process. Cases typically resolve when adversaries conclude that the differential between the amount of their upside potential and their downside risk is relatively small. It does not need to be a 50-50 proposition. It just needs to be close. The longer the parties spend during the distributive bargaining process presenting numbers where there is a large difference between upside potential and downside risk, the more likely negotiations will break down. 2, in caucus discussions held either before or during the mediation, mediators should ask counsel what number they expect to receive as opposed to the number they hope to receive from their adversary in response to a number they wish to have the mediator communicate to their adversary. This discussion can potentially lead to a decision to revise a number that someone previously had thought about communicating to the other side. The importance of this discussion is magnified in situations where the parties exchange mediation statements which contain settlement demands or offers which are clearly not within the expected range of settlement. Engaging in this discussion forces involved counsel to think not only about their case, but also that of their opponents as well. As is often stated, good lawyers know all aspects of their case, but great lawyers know all aspects of their case as well as those of their opponent. 3, in cases where liability is not an issue, and therefore the question is not, will the plaintiff receive compensation, but rather how much, and there have been no settlement negotiations preceding the actual mediation conference, have the defense give serious consideration to making a first settlement offer and thus begin the distributing bargaining process on their own. 4, mediators should pay close attention not only to the magnitude of the moves being made during the course of the distributive bargaining process, but also verbal and or physical expressions being made by the participants. These can provide clear signals of potential frustration and impatience with the distributive bargaining process and thus suggest a need to employ a different type of negotiating strategy in an effort to narrow the gap between the parties and hopefully get the parties to agreement. In summary, while utilization of distributive bargaining can be an effective way to achieve case resolution, in this new era of video conference mediation, excessive reliance on this methodology should be avoided by encouraging mediators and mediation participants to bring a greater amount of efficiency to this process, and in so doing, reduce the likelihood of a collapse in settlement negotiations. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Rob Daisley, who is certainly the finest mediator in Tampa, Florida, and that area of the country. Rob is a bit more technologically focused than some of the rest of us, and he's going to be showing you some of those technical skills in the way he handles exhibits, documents, and spreadsheets to make his mediations more successful. I think that he's going to give you some really practical tips that you'll be able to use. So here is Rob Daisley.
Zoom, what do you think? Is it just awesome? Or is it the best we can do right now? I guess we'll make the most of it. I'm going to suggest a third way. How about Zoom is different? No different really than mediating in a new office environment. Perhaps you're mediating in a lawyer's office where you've never been before. There's a different physical setup. There's some disadvantages, but there are also some advantages. And if we think about that office environment as different, we can make for a more effective mediation. Well, Zoom is certainly different. It's an online office, if you will, and it has a different physical setup. There are certainly some advantages, and we're going to talk about those in this presentation called Making the Most of Zoom. My name's Rob Daisley. It's great to be here. I'm a full-time mediator based out of Tampa, Florida. I've been mediating since 2004 and mediating on Zoom now for 3 years. We've done 160 or so mediations on Zoom, and I will readily confess about 155 of those since March 17th, 2020. We have learned so much in the past few months, and we continue to learn every day as we've used Zoom as a different platform, and a platform that has certainly some tools that are very, very powerful if we just give them some thought. I would like to thank the Hong Kong Mediation Council, the International Academy of Mediators, and our very generous sponsors for affording us this opportunity to share with you some of our experiences from mediating on Zoom and in person over the many, many decades which we've mediated. The Zoom era has just absolutely been fascinating because there is so much new to it. And our agenda today is going to cover really the differences and the differences in perspectives that you take when you mediate on Zoom. I'm going to use one feature as an example, the screen share feature, and that will enable us to really visualize how, when we mediate on Zoom, we have some opportunities if we just give them some thought. So let's start with what the screen share feature is. It's not a tech talk here, but the screen share feature is a button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. So you put your mouse over the share screen button. You then click the screen you want to share, and in San, Yi, you have a screen share. There's the agenda for today's presentation. But I begin all my mediations with an agenda, whether I'm in the office or on Zoom. I found that the agenda is more effective on Zoom. It has to do with the perspective of the participants as well as the perspective of the person doing the talking. So with all my mediations, I begin with a very, very succinct description of mediation, which happens to be my catchphrase. Our mission is to get to the printer. When I do it on Zoom, I put the mouse over the word agreement, and I let the word just hang there, agreement. It explains what we're doing here. The parties are attempting to reach an agreement to resolve the dispute themselves in lieu of having it go to a court. This particular screen share is better than the visuals that I'm able to use in my office. It's better in two respects. One is the participants have just better eyesight to it. They can see it better. The other is on the right side of the screen, I can see everyone in the mediation without straining. I don't need to change my angle. The people who are viewing the screen share don't need to change their angle. So just to roll through this agenda idea to give you another example of how, if you're doing a mediation on Zoom, you might take advantage of this, where in the office it might be unwieldy. Let's just roll through some of the key elements of the agenda for a mediation. With every mediation, whether you're mediating in Hong Kong, London, Brisbane, Tampa, now 3 parts. First part is getting the issues on the table, having a conversation, having the opportunity to discuss things, having to exchange the information that's important to resolving the dispute. This slide right here with very, very large font is something that you can expand upon as you see the reaction of the participants on the right side of the screen. In my case, I try to emphasize that we're going to talk about the real world as well as the dispute world. So perspectives are welcome in mediation. And I have some additional slides that I will go through to visualize that. Depending on the mediation, it'll be a very, very short part of the agenda, or I'll expand a little. The whole agenda takes about 5 minutes. So we're not talking about a long PowerPoint presentation. Second part of mediation, and again, this is the same the world around. It's the work. It's identifying the settlement possibilities. How will we be able to resolve this dispute to the satisfaction of both parties? And this particular visual gives you an opportunity to explain that. You can see the reactions, you get the head nod, and then you can move on. The final part of the mediation process is where we try to find the solution that works for everyone. I use 2 slides here. I use this particular slide, which just explains it, and then I go to the next level, which is a visual. Again, on Zoom, that visual is right in the dead center of everyone's view, and you can see their reactions on the right side of the screen. We are fundamentally, as mediators, in the peace business, and arguably, we're on the sales end. So I'm not bashful about asking people to envision a resolution in a way that has meaning to them, meaning beyond perhaps the dispute. This visual right here of a sunrise, I think really pretty much says it all as far as what we're trying to achieve in mediation. And again, with the screen share, I can see if people are reacting favorably to it, or if perhaps they're skeptical and they've got the arms crossed or whatever. I can see the entire array of people who are in the mediation room. So that's the first example, is an agenda. And I'm going to now talk about a couple of more subtle uses of the Zoom screen share. The first one is guiding conversation. And it's subtle because when you think about guiding conversation, you think about having that button hovering over the screen share, you have the opportunity to focus a conversation and also engage in active listening just by using the screen share. Here's a real world example. I have a plaintiff who's discussing some major water intrusion in a fairly significant insurance matter, 6-figure insurance matter where there was very, very significant water damage. And as the plaintiff is trying to describe that water damage, I pull up the photos. Oh, this looks like a water stain. Where was that? And now we have some active listening. We have dialogue. We have a conversation with a visual. And when you're actually doing the screen share, you can scroll. Oh, is this mold? This was the ramification that you were talking about. This is why you were so concerned. And you can go back and forth between the different photos. And of course, pictures tell 1,000 words. But on Zoom, pictures, dialogue, and the interaction, tremendously powerful. One more example of guiding conversation that I think is a little subtle, but it's important to talk about, and that's expert reports. So expert reports, they can be dense, they can be thick, they can be yay thick. And we have a great deal of difficulty in exchanging those in the office. We could do printouts. Sometimes they're in, the copies aren't that good. I use the Apple TV, and then people don't always have the same view of it. But here on Zoom, when we're talking about an expert report and somebody mentions the expert testimony, I can flash up the report on the screen share and guide the conversation to the important points, including perhaps the points that are harder to understand. In this case, what's that 50-6 mean? Oh, WOR, is that significant? This happens to be some subsurface testing, it's a geotechnical report. It's very, very thick. It's very, very dense. It's very important for it. And I can also guide the conversation back and forth to the different elements that are in this expert report. Here we had some testing results, and we also had a repair estimate. So by scrolling, we can have that conversation go back and forth between the two. What is the significance of this chemical grouting? Why are we doing chemical grouting? Oh, that has to do with the top 10 feet. I get it. So the top 10 feet, we're trying to firm up those soils, trying to get these 7s and 10s into a denser material. Again, very, very direct, very, very powerful, and very, very succinct. This kind of conversation can take place with a Zoom screen share in 2 to 5 minutes. Where if we're in the office and we're straining, we're putting on our glasses and we're passing around papers and we're fumbling with the reports, people are having a hard time staying focused on the key conversation. So the last example I'd like to show you is one that's even more challenging in some respects to work into the conversation. But in my view, it's more important, and that has to do with spreadsheets. So I'm going to put up a spreadsheet here and just talk about how this was utilized during a screen share in mediation. This particular spreadsheet I started in a private caucus session with the plaintiff and actually filled in the numbers on the fly. So most of our cases, they're civil actions, they're actions of law, for money damages. They might have equitable issues, they might have non-monetary terms, but we're talking about the monetary terms, the economic resolution, first and foremost in many of our mediations, if not most of our mediations. And of course, here in the United States, it's dollars and cents. So I'm in the plaintiff room. They're trying to describe their claim. They're talking about the elements of their claim. They're talking about the detailed reasons of their claim, and I'm taking notes. I filled in this spreadsheet as we were talking. And if somebody said, for example, that it was $74,399, I would type that down. They went, oh no, it actually was $77,500. And change it right there. Everybody sees it. Everybody affirms it. And I see the reactions as we go forward. And here was what was really powerful about this screen share. We created it in the plaintiff room in a private caucus. Then I went over to the defense room in another private caucus to explain the claim. First thing I did was throw up the screen share, so everybody could visualize what the claim was. Now we can have some dialogue. What are the elements? Here are the elements over here on the left side of the screen. Here are the dollar amounts. Here's the amount of the claim in total. Here are some of the points that were being raised. With permission, I'm able to identify with specificity the messages that one side wants me to share with the other side, and I have permission under the confidentiality rules to exchange. And then the picture is worth more than 1,000 words. We have the totality of the claim, and we have the first round offer showing some compromise. The last one I'll show you here is later in the mediation. And I copied the sheet to make it easy so I wouldn't lose anything and shifted it over. So in both rooms, because we were doing shuttle diplomacy back and forth, I put up the screen and I showed the pattern of the negotiations. We even talked about some brackets. Brackets have become an international phenomenon as people try to negotiate in ranges of numbers. And the visual bracket is a lot more powerful than the verbal. And you can see we had competing brackets. We got into a zone of probable agreement. It was going to be in the low six figures, somewhere between 100 and 150,000. And at that point, we engaged in a hypothetical discussion over resolutions, and we got to the printer. So that's the example of spreadsheets. Again, it's just an example. I would encourage everyone to think creatively about this. Another thing that I just might mention off the cuff is that one of the big differences on Zoom is that you're using a microphone. So Michelle Calapitas, unbelievably talented singer, doesn't really need a microphone. When he uses a microphone, though, he uses it as an instrument. And he lets the microphone do the work. You can do that on Zoom. You can get the microphone closer to you. It's going to have a different sound. You can lean in, lower your voice. You can back off a little bit, maybe raise your voice, letting the microphone do the work. Again, just think about it as something different, an opportunity, really, an opportunity to make your mediations more effective, whether you're mediator, advocate, or party. I'm Rob Daisley. I want to thank you so much for this opportunity, Hong Kong Mediation Council, IAM, participants in this terrific Hong Kong Symposium. I hope everyone learns so much from this, as I'm sure they will, and will carry on with their mediations and get everyone to the printer and bring a little more peace to them. Thank you very much.
Rob is also our membership chairman, and the person who we hope that you'll be contacting, either directly or through Jody Sin, to explore the possibility of membership in the International Academy of Mediators. As I said previously, now restructured to have many different levels of entry membership, and would welcome your participation. You'll have access to our listserv, our webinars, our seminars, both virtual and our in-person conferences, and an opportunity to get to know mediators from all over the world and share ideas. So we hope that you will be in touch. That can have our time. I think what remains now is a brief question and answer session. If you have not already submitted your questions via the chat function of Zoom, please do so now, and I will be happy to do my very best to answer questions about not only my presentation, but the others as well.
I'll be making a list of questions that are coming through as the various speakers were speaking. And Jean, if it's all right, I'll run through the questions and then throw them open to you and for answers. There's one from Pu Yin Xuen. Getting people with authority, getting the full attention, is it easier on Zoom rather than a person-to-person? I don't know whether you want to answer that one, Jean.
Because there frankly are less excuses that can be presented for the persons not participating. The value of having the insurance adjuster participate, or as was mentioned in the other presentations, the CEO, the chief financial officer, it really leaves people with nowhere to hide as to why is this person not attending. And that can be confirmed ahead of time, even if it's for a limited period of time during the mediation itself. Also, the idea of persons with authority sometimes goes beyond mere financial authority. I've had mediations where a husband or a wife has been present during the mediation and the other spouse has not. And the person who is present is constantly stepping out of the room to make phone calls to talk to that other person. Well, I would prefer that person be at the mediation. And if this is a Zoom mediation taking place at that person's home, I will do my best to invite that spouse in to join us, because this is a decision maker that needs to be here. And there's no way other than Zoom that I can actually accomplish that.
Amirali Nasir from Egypt has suggested that he might be creating a virtual room for people, particularly where there are very personal, stressful issues between them, that they can see each other, as it were, in a virtual room rather than face each other across the table. What do you think about that as an idea?
Well, I think in certain kinds of cases, it's a very good idea. We have a fair amount of litigation in the United States regarding sexual harassment. Those are cases where there is a real reluctance to even be in the same building or the same law office as between the alleged victim and the assailant. Zoom creates that buffer of safety. The virtual joint session, which Eric Galton is so fond of, has many advantages in terms of privacy and overcoming people's reluctance to participate in a mediation. So I think that's an excellent idea in the right kind of case. There are some cases where people need to just sit down and crunch numbers, and that's a little different than the highly emotional case. But certainly in your emotional cases, I would recommend it highly.
Audrey Chouard raises two interesting questions. Do we have any experience of a level playing field in a hybrid mediation? Is the balance then upset by some people being on Zoom and other people being present in a room, possibly with the mediator or with themselves? And following on from that, are there any cogent reasons to decline a Zoom mediation? If I can answer the last question, I've done a paper based upon the English law, which penalizes people who unreasonably refuse mediation, which has been since a decision in 2004, and it's been a big drive. And I have compared those reasons for penalizing people for unreasonably refusing mediation to unreasonably refusing to go on Zoom. And in my opinion, there's no difference. I think that there's no really good reason for refusing a Zoom mediation. But as far as the level playing field is concerned, we've all had experience, I think, Jean, of having some parties remote, other parties in person. Does that upset the balance?
Well, it does if there's a perception that it does. And that's something that the mediator can deal with in pre-conference phone calls, speaking with the allegedly disadvantaged party and trying to flush out the concerns, trying to create some ground rules. The way I interpreted the question, Michelle, was to the effect that the people who are in person with the mediator might have some advantages over the people who are communicating by Zoom. And I think it calls for the mediator to set some ground rules, to make a special effort to connect with the people who are functioning through Zoom. And then it requires all of us to recognize what mediation is. It's not an arbitration. The mediator is not going to decide who wins or who loses or what the value of the case is. Oftentimes when I have in-person mediations, but separated by private caucus, I will have been with one of the parties for about an hour, and I will come back into the other room and I will see some discomfort. It's like, boy, you spent so much time with them, you haven't heard from us. And the way I will sometimes try to take the sting out of that, and because I think it's true, is to say, frankly, I do you more good when I'm in the other room than when I'm in this room. Because when I'm in that room, I'm talking about what their exposure is and what their vulnerability might be. And so that generally eases the tension quite a bit.
Yeah. Terry Ricardo raises the interesting issue that Zoom mediation means you lose the serendipitous meetings, for example, in the washrooms where people meet by chance and always talk about the case. Is that a disadvantage of Zoom? My answer is yes, it is, because sometimes those serendipitous meetings can be helpful. But on the other hand, my experience, I suspect yours too, Jean, is that on Zoom, one is much closer to the parties, as we are, for example. You're near to the camera, and you're much more face-to-face than you would be in a room of people.
I think certainly our experience has proven that to be true, and our ability to communicate that to others is going to be an essential function of, frankly, marketing Zoom mediation. Those who have done it will, I think, immediately be attracted to it as a forum. It is true that in in-person, fully in-person mediations, there is the opportunity to bump into people in the hallway, have a few words, for that matter, for the lawyers to step out and have a few words. It's a little more awkward with Zoom. You have to put people in separate conference rooms. Their absence is noted. And so you do lose some of that informal contact, but I think there are more than enough other benefits that outweigh that.
Sundar Vishwacham Sharma asks the question, but when you're dealing with state or government officials, how do we get them to be as open and frank as private parties, bearing in mind, of course, that they are usually answerable to a higher authority?
Well, that is always a challenge. And the way I have always dealt with that traditionally is I will recognize that the person who is here as a representative may well have lots of levels of authority that they're reporting to, a board of directors, a city council, a board of supervisors, a group of owners. And if at some point that person feels that they cannot go beyond a certain amount of authority, and I'm referring to the defense here, that they are not really authorized to do that, what I will try to do is shift the mediation to one where we're not bargaining for dollars, but we're bargaining for the recommendation of the representative who is there. That still gives him the opportunity. You know, there are strong recommendations and weaker recommendations. Still gives the absolute authority to the larger designated party, but allows us to continue to go forward. I noted that the question also talked about creating greater informality. We try to do that with our pre-mediation phone calls, try to have some contact with the state or government official ahead of time, and try to show some compassion towards them. You know, who needs love more than they do, worrying about what someone else is going to say or second guess about the positions they have taken. So it becomes important to demonstrate to them that we understand they're in a difficult position, and we're here to help.
If I can add one helpful tip, I have pre-mediation conferences as well, and what I do is invite the lawyers, and I do it separately with the parties, to bring their clients with them to get them used to Zoom, particularly when they've never done a mediation on Zoom before, and just illustrate how one moves from room to room, reassure them about the security that I'm pretty certain exists now with Zoom, and just get them used to the process before the mediation day itself. It's also an opportunity, of course, to get to know the clients and their lawyers in advance of the mediation. But I think we've well overrun our time. Not that I'm complaining, because I think that there's been nearly 100 people listening to this particular capsule, and we've had 100 or over 100 for every single capsule for these last 3 days of the symposium. What I'd like to do is to thank all those who contributed, thank all those who've logged in and have for the helpful comments we've been receiving. And above all, I'd like to thank the Hong Kong team, Jody in particular, CW and Sam Wei, the technical team putting it all together, enduring with huge patience the inability of us older people to familiarize ourselves with this technology, but we're there, and it's been a huge success. And last but not least, thank all our sponsors who've made this possible, particularly for the translation to Mandarin. And I hope that we can hold a conference in the not too distant future in the Far East and link it up with mainland China is one of my ambitions when I'm president next year. So thank you, Jean, for putting together the capsule number 6. Thank you to all those eminent speakers who gave their time and their wisdom from the many thousands of mediations they've conducted. And I think we've all learned a great deal.
Michelle, we would certainly be remiss to not include you in that list of acknowledgements. Both you and Jody and CW's team have labored for months to put on a presentation like this. Your dedication, your determination, your global vision of the talent that can be shared, the talent and the ideas that can be shared by all of us in dealing with disputes from whatever geographic area we come from, has been frankly inspiring. And I applaud you for the excellent work that you have all done.
I think the last word should go to Jody.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So first of all, I would like to thank International Academy of Mediators, IAM, for choosing Hong Kong Mediation Council as the co-organizer. We are indeed proud to have an opportunity to work with all the brilliant practitioners from the US, from Europe, UK, and other parts of the world so that we can put together this 4-day symposium. My special thanks to Michelle. Without him, I think this symposium would not have been possible. And Michelle has helped us to bring in the entire panel of speakers for the 6 capsules. I think for all those who have attended in the past few days, we have over like 30 speakers from the overseas. So thank you, Michelle, for doing that. Really grateful. And I also thank my team, CW and Sam, especially. Without them, all right, and also my subcommittee members. So they have helped us a lot in putting this together, and especially to all the sponsors who have very kindly give us their contribution financially to the entire symposium, which has made this possible. So last but not the least, to all of you who have supported Hong Kong Mediation Council all the way. And I hope that we will have opportunity to organize this kind of symposium in the future. Thank you very much. All of you have a good day and a good weekend.
Goodbye all. God bless and keep safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Michelle.
Pleasure, Jody. Thank you. Thanks, Jean. Well done.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
All right, Shalom.
Congratulations on a job well done.
Jody, I'll speak to you sometime next week.
Good night.
Good night.
Well done, all of you, my friends. Well done. Great presentations.
Thank you, Orit.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
Hey.
Yes. Laila Toff, Orit.
Bye, Lato. Good night.